I've written a book manuscript that is under consideration that investigates the relationships between dreaming and self-cultivation. And I'm going to share with you today a little bit of what I think I've found. In the early 360s CE, a divine resident of the Shangqing or Upper Purity Empyrean, Lady Right Blossom of the Cloudy Copse Palace, had a word of advice for Sima Yu, the future Jin Emperor Jianwen. He reigned 371-372, and the advice might give a modern reader a bit of pause. Place deer musk incense in your pillow at the neck. This will block any watery infusions and will prevent something called dreams. Why would a fragrance be thought capable of preventing dreams? And of all those available, why was deer musk the one recommended here? What were watery infusions? How were they connected to dreams? What did it mean to characterize a dream as These are among the questions I'm going to try to answer today as an entry into the complex relationships between dreaming on the one hand and self-cultivation on the other. Let's start with the last question. Among, as you know, is commonly rendered as nightmare. In today's usage, a nightmare is a scary dream. And a dream is a fleeting neurological event taking place exclusively in the sleeper's brain. If we then automatically translate among as nightmare in every case and leave it at that, we are projecting this modern psychologistic notion of what happens when we dream onto ancient and medieval texts. And we then fail to understand both what was so troubling about such dreams and the responses to them, prescribed and described in many texts. Take, for example, those prescribed in 3 recovered manuscripts. In 2 bamboo strip daybooks buried in 217 BCE, recovered at Shuihudi in Hubei in 1975, and introduced a long time ago to the scholarly world by Don Harper, we find in the A version this passage. So when a person has had an dream, upon waking, unbind the hair, sit facing the northwest, and incant this prayer. I dare report you to Qinqi. So-and-so, you put in your own name there, has had an dream. Flee back home to Qinqi. Qinqi, drink heartily, eat heartily, grant me, great, my name, great broadcloth, if not coins, then cloth, if not cocoons, then silk stuff, then it will stop. Now, fast forward to around 800 CE, in an illustrated demonography from Dunhuang, also written about by Don Harper, this text copied by the monk Daoxin. For the benefit, he explains, of Taoists and Buddhist monks alike, we find this passage. When a person has had an dream during the night, rise at dawn in the northeast part of the house, unbind the hair, and chant this incantation. Bochi, bochi, he does not drink ale or eat meat, but regularly dines in exalted realms on high. May this dream return to bochi. Crushing dreams cease, give rise to great blessings. Do this 7 times, there will be no odium. Although separated by 1,000 years, these texts recommend the same sequence of action. Unbind the hair, face a certain direction, utter an incantation. If the makers and readers of these texts thought of dreams as mental events and saw some dreams being frightening as the problematic thing about them, this seems like an awful lot of trouble to have gone to. But this isn't what these passages assume about dreams at all. Instead, they assume these dreams, not necessarily all dreams, to have resulted from contact with other beings. It's these other beings who are spoken to in the incantations. The beings directly responsible aren't named here, but in the Shuehu D strips, they're addressed by the second person pronoun R, which is interesting. And in both texts, their distant overseer is invoked by name, Qinqi or Boqi. Note that despite being non-human, these beings are all addressed as persons in a formalized verbal utterance. So they participate with us in some of the same cultural forms. They're other, but not wholly other. It's this that allows them to be addressed, and it's their being addressed that allows them to be sent away. One tries to persuade their overseer to recall them, and the dream agents themselves to go back where they belong, for they don't belong here. The expression yin meng, crushing dreams, pressing dreams, in the Dunhuang text implies one way in which these others might trigger dreams by pressing down on the sleeper. Here we have a parallel to the etymology of the English word nightmare, which, as many of you probably know, originally meant not scary dream, but quoting the Oxford English Dictionary, a female spirit or monster supposed to beset people and animals by night, setting upon them when they're asleep and producing a feeling of suffocation by its weight. If among were nightmares, then it was maybe in the circa 300 CE Old English sense, dreams involving dangerous contact with another entity. A late 4th century Zhiguai compilation preserves an anecdote useful for showing that these encounters were dangerous in part because they were a vector for illness. Now you can see this story on your screen. In it, the protagonist is ill. He starts to feel that there's something on his bed covers. His illness then worsens. He musters his strength and manages to capture the thing, which then changes into a bird resembling an owl. And after he does this, he recovers. Well, still, we haven't come to grips with the term As I think probably all of you here know, it's often translated as evil. So maybe we could get away with just calling among evil dreams and move on. But this would imply that what made dreams problematic was the moral nature of the dream itself, the dreamer, or the agents triggering the dream. But the evidence doesn't support this at all. And the root meaning of isn't evil anyhow. Xu Shen in his Shuowen Jiezi defines it as guo, transgressive. Du Yu in his Zuozhuan commentary defines it at one point as guo, another as go hui, something like adulterated or foul or polluted, unclean. Many other examples could be cited, even including Analects 4.4. So we're dealing not with evil in any dualistic or ontological sense, but something out of bounds, out of place. With and related terms, such as these, we're in the domain, most fundamentally, not of good and evil, but of purity and pollution, as much aesthetic as moral, involving things like disgust, revulsion, horror. I'm therefore adopting Don Harper's unexplained rendition of which I think is quite a nice rendition, as foul in such contexts. Useful, I think, for capturing a spectrum of meanings, but stressing the revulsion often associated with polluting situations. Aside from an important article by Robin Yates and scattered mentions elsewhere, we don't see this aspect of ancient and medieval Chinese culture considered very carefully, particularly, I think, ancient culture, at least in striking contrast to the attention it tends to receive from anthropologists doing field work in recent contexts. Instead, texts dealing with self-cultivation especially are often viewed through psychologizing and moralizing lenses that obscure the purity and pollution concepts at work in them. Doing so risks losing sight, I think, of all that was at stake. Contact with death and the dead, menstrual blood, childbirth, amputees, convicts, slaves, and ethnic others, members of the opposite sex, demons and ghosts, dirt and excrement, in many situations were deemed polluting, and so were hedged about with rituals and restrictions. As anthropologist Mary Douglas recognized half a century ago, such understandings are produced by the boundaries structuring a culture. Dirt, she says, is never a unique, isolated event. Where there is dirt, there is system. Dirt is the byproduct of a systematic classification. In other words, as she puts it on another page, where there is no differentiation, there is no defilement. Seen in this light, the demonic is dirt mobilized. Jonathan Z. Smith shrewdly drew the link between the demonic and pollution in these terms, which you see on your screen. The demonic is a relational or labeling term which occurs only in certain situations, part of a complex system of boundaries and limits. Demons serve as classificatory markers, which signal what is strong, weak, controlled, exaggerated in a given society. You probably noticed that both the Shui Hu Di and Dunhuang texts direct practitioners to unbind their hair when beginning the action. As in most societies, hairstyles, ornaments, and coverings were important markers of social status and role. Hair was to be kept clean and tied up as a matter of ritual purity. Unbound and fully exposed hair was strongly associated with ethnic others and demons. So we have this Mark Abramson quote from his dissertation where he sort of generalizing over a lot of evidence that he has produced, mentions that men in Han times, or I think, well, Han men as opposed to non-Han men, only exposed their hair when they moved into liminal states, such as mourning. So in our dream practices, then, by loosening his hair, the performer was stepping onto the threshold between civilization and otherness to deal with the impurity he had incurred from the dream. Particularly with regard to ancient texts, I think that our view has often been obscured by under-translations of passages that, if rendered more literally, would spotlight rather than hide this aspect of Chinese culture. To mention just two examples quickly, following Robin Yates, I suggest that we would be better off rendering the Liu Shi Chunqiu phrase in Xue Liu Shuo as learning that pollutes and theories that corrupt, whereas Knobloch and Riegel give wayward learning and heterodox theories, which to my mind not only occludes the pollution discourse involved and projects an orthodoxy model where it really doesn't belong, but also misses the register in which the impact of such learning on people is denounced. As Yates says, such translations reroute the reference, construing these sorts of phrases as pertaining to the inner feelings or character of the individual rather than to any heteropathic agent external to him. And here's another quick example from the Xunzi, where I give what I think would be a literal and therefore more helpful translation, and then a couple of alternatives that have been presented. Oniric contact with certain beings was itself polluting. But what about the contents of polluting dreams? Of course, we can't peer into past individuals' private experiences to discover those, but if we sift enough texts we occasionally find a few suggestive remnants. 3 quick examples. In the Vaipulya Dharani Sutra, translated early in the 5th century, there's a scene, a very fascinating scene, where a celestial king stands up and vows before the Buddha to protect all future upholders of the sutra that the Buddha is in the process of preaching. This kind of self-reference, as many of you know, is very common in Buddhist sutras, and it's very, very weird. Among the miseries this celestial king promises to inflict on anyone daring to harass the sutra upholders are illness, death, career failure, robbery, false charges from local officials. That's my favorite. And then this one, he'll cause them to roll around in filth, basically, or walk around naked, and so forth. Here's another example. 40 years earlier or so, we have a Shangqing Taoist scripture, the purple texts for short, has been expertly translated and studied by Steve Bokenkamp, pinning polluting dreams, especially on the nocturnal wanderings of the Chi Po, or the 7 white souls. The scripture is mentioning all this because it's setting up the need for the method that it's about to prescribe for anchoring these souls down during sleep, so that while you're asleep, they don't go off unchecked and wander about, having the kinds of experiences you see here on the screen, very heavily polluting kinds of imagery and activity. So you want to keep that from happening. And a final example, there's a Zhengao passage where 2 of Xu Mi's polluting dreams are sort of summarized briefly, and here's one of those. He dreams of seeing fluids leaking. So this might actually be, it might be like offerings, food offerings or something, but it might be something even more disgusting. But in any case, it's grave goods. Oh yeah, because in the coffin, right, I forgot that phrase. So you don't want to see something leaking from a coffin in a dream. And the coffin in question was the dreamer's wife, deceased wife, Tao Kodo. So this was, I think a big problem. The points where this pollution discourse and practice that I've spent most of the time so far talking about, on the one hand, and discourse and practice concerning dreams, on the other hand, intersect, make up what I call the exorcistic paradigm of dreaming. And it's one of several distinct paradigms structuring notions of what dreams are, why they matter, and what should be done about them. In a foul dream, the dreamer has been contacted or attacked by an exogenous agent, or has dreamed of a polluting situation, or sometimes both. Either any of this sort of activity can lead to illness, madness, death. The paradigm's logic goes like this. The dream pollution is acquired through contact with an impure being, substance, or situation. To dream is to contact or be contacted. Therefore, to dream of impure beings, substances, or situations is to enter a state of pollution. Now, the idea that to dream is to contact or be contacted is seen explicitly as early as the Qiulun chapter of the Zhuangzi. And whether this passage dates to around 300 BCE or more like 150 BCE, it's still fairly early. The lack of elaboration, furthermore, I think, suggests that this notion was already commonplace and didn't require much explanation. And you see here that, these verbs of contact. But in this respect, dreaming was just a subset, because as Jane Gainey has shown, sensation of all kinds was often construed as a kind of touching, the influx of subtle substances through the portals of the sense organs. Here's just a couple of examples quickly. Jane Gainey cites these and many others. The interesting thing to see here is that the same key verbs, jiao and jie, are the ones used both in these passages on what's happening during sensation and in the Zhuangzi passage that we just saw about what's happening during dreaming. So to look upon, hear, touch, or even smell the wrong thing, or to be looked upon or touched by the wrong agent, was to expose oneself to pollution. To mention just one example, and there's lots of these, Sun Tzu Miao's Essential Prescriptions for Urgent Ills, written in the 650s, cautions, as you see there on the slide, when a woman has just given birth or is about to give birth, she must not be looked upon by anyone who is basically under a condition of ritual pollution by death or mourning. Because if this happens, she'll have a difficult birth. And if she's already given birth, the child will be harmed by this sensory contact. We're now in a position to go back to the goddess's mid-4th century advice to Sima Yu. But actually, he probably already knew some of the theory and practice underlying that advice. And I left off a part of that passage that I think where she is introducing a new idea that he wouldn't have known about, but I don't have time to get into that one. But I think the parts that I showed in the slide are things that any, more or less well-informed Chinese person would already have known quite a lot about. So in the Han period pharmacopoeia, the Shennong Bancao Jing, for example, there's a passage in which deer musk incense or shexiang is recommended for the list of things that you see on the screen, warding off qi, killing demons and specters, eradicating pathogens, and preventing dreams in these ways that are caused by yin, by demonic incursion. Also, among the medicinal substances, Gao had recommended to drive off predatory mountain-dwelling animals and demons. We find in that list deer musk incense. That a scent would be so commonly thought to ward off unwanted dreams indicates how far we are from any psychologistic notion of what dreaming is. Deer musk didn't work on the dreamer's psyche. It was an apotropaion. It drove off other beings from the dreamer, from the sleeper. Also, the notion of watery infusions, or shuizhu, as a source of misery and of harmful dreams was surely familiar already to the future emperor. As Li Jianmin has shown in several nice studies, zhu were disorders caused by contact with impure substances or environments, whether or not a demonic agent, one of these sorts of critters, was involved. The Divine Farmer's Classic alone prescribes over 50 treatments for such ailments. Many are found in other medical texts as well. It's against this cultural background that we should view the many methods recommended in extant texts for dealing with polluting dreams. Some of these methods are prophylactic. They're meant to prevent such dreams from occurring in the first place. And these are too complex for me to get into today in any detail, except just to mention that there are some methods of that sort. Other methods are restorative. They're to be performed the morning after a foul dream to return the practitioner to a state of ritual purity. Some of these restorative methods depend on summoning deities to help expel the polluting agents. In others, the practitioner acts on his own authority, and some methods sort of combine both of these modes. I want to show you a few more examples now. In this sutra, looks like it was translated in the 6th or 7th century. It recommends to those who have seen a foul dream in the night that for 14 days they avoid eating. Without leaving their place of practice, each evening they are to bathe in scented water, put on a new robe, and intone a dharani before a Buddha icon as many times as they can before they fall asleep. On the morning of the 15th day, they are to rise, heat pure water with fragrant herbs in a clean cauldron, strain out the plant material, form a powder of incense with purple and white sandalwood, add this to the water, then fill a bowl with the water, place it before the icon, enchant the water with a spell spoken 108 times, and then bathe with this water. Afterwards, they may eat again. And I guess they would be pretty hungry by that point. In at least 3 texts preserved in the Taoist canon, we find these instructions. So if in the night you've had a polluting dream, don't tell of it. In the morning, take some water in your mouth, face east, spurt the water out, say this rhymed incantation, then there will be no odium. We see here again, as in the Dunhuang text, the command to, and the Shuihu Di text, to convert inauspicious to auspicious. The dream is also to be covered over. The dream is to be covered over with grass and wood. I find this fascinating, neutralizing the pollution. In methods like this, the admonition not to speak about the dream is commonplace. Such passages don't explain why they counsel silence, probably because they didn't need to. Pollution could spread through speech, as through any other sound. Speaking of the wrong topic on the wrong occasion could be polluting. To tell of one's dreams was to move them out from the private to the social, nocturnal to diurnal spheres, making them, as one anthropologist puts it, a party to the unfolding of social reality. Dream accounts are performative. They do things and they change things. So polluting dreams had to be verbally quarantined. Here's another method. In a text called New Collection of the Duke of Zhou's Book of Interpreting Dreams, for Interpreting Dreams, a Dunhuang manuscript, which mostly comprises a key to dream interpretation, but which ends with this kind of apotropaic passage, we find these instructions. And I won't read all of this aloud, but the idea is similar. You've had a polluting dream in the night. You wake up early in the morning. Don't speak of the dream. Purify your mind. You write talismans in this case. You put them at the foot of your bed without telling anyone, and then you say an incantation. And the incantation goes on for more lines than we've seen so far. And toward the end, he actually mentions polluting dreams. Your surname is Yun, your given name, Xingui, etc. So he's warning demons that he knows their names, but the demons are also the dreams, or the dreams are the demons. Because the dream was polluting, one is to purify one's mind, Jingxin. The Protestant model of religion would see this mental component as the centerpiece and write off all the rest of this stuff as just outward rote, just as a predominant view of dreaming would see the dream as a merely mental event. But this inward purification, the correlate of the jai carried out before ancestral and other sacrifices, only prepares for the actual ritual work. I'm intrigued by the mantle of authority that the dreamer puts on here. In speaking the incantation and writing out the talismans, the practitioner performs the role of someone duly authorized to command the spirits involved. The injunction to do this speedily in accordance with the statutes and commands reminds the spirits that he has a long tradition of sacred knowledge and an invisible spiritual army backing him up. The rhyming incantation is, of course, heavily yang to dispel the miasmic in. The ritualist's insistence that he knows the names of the offending beings partakes of the ancient notion that it's by invoking demons and sprites' names that one drives them off, just as it's by their names that humans are administratively kept track of in this world and the next. Perhaps most tellingly, the polluting dreams and thoughts are themselves addressed by name, as if the spirit were the dream or the dream the spirit. The whole performance is a rhetorically complex attempt to persuade these dream-triggering others to go away. By contrast, here's a couple of Taoist methods that emphasize reliance on divine assistance to restore purity. In an early celestial master schedule of gods to be invoked in various situations, we find this passage. So the dreamer having awakened is, or sounds like maybe someone having polluting dreams on a habitual basis. You're to summon in the Lord of heavenly glory with his army and get them to drive the polluting agents away and leave you alone. Writing around 317, Go Hong recommended this. If you have a yin, a demonic dream while sleeping, go outdoors at once, and gazing up at the auxiliary star. This is a minute star in the Dipper, Northern Dipper complex. Make a fist with your thumb inside and hold to the one. The demon will immediately depart. What if it's cloudy or rainy? Well, in that case, you remain in your room and you simply face north while visualizing Cun, Sujin, the auxiliary star. And you could do the same thing. So holding to the one here secures protection from various proximate harms, including diseases and assaults by animals, ghosts, and dream-polluting demons. The practitioner reestablishes connection with the appropriate deity by visually locking onto his seat up in the heavens. If we had time today to review any of the lists of things practitioners of self-cultivation regimens of any sort were enjoined to do and not do, we would see that almost every aspect of their waking lives was closely regulated. Presenting oneself at a temple or at court or before a magistrate, offering sacrifice, handling, transmitting, reciting, copying a scripture, appearing before an altar, submitting a petition to the gods, performing confession, repentance, observing mourning, even eating and voiding waste. These and countless other situations were governed by manifold boundaries and norms, even for those who were not full-time religious practitioners. And here I'm just showing you, I'm not going to read this, don't worry. And this is just a small segment, okay, of the rules that are prescribed when writing out a petition in the Celestial Master tradition. This passage is from Master Red Pine's Almanac. Things like, don't let the petition touch the table, spread a clean cloth there. Don't breathe, don't eat impure foods and then breathe on the document. If someone comes in and interrupts you while you're preparing this solemn document, you've got to wait a year before you can even make this petition, and so forth. I'm just trying to give a sense here of how detailed these kinds of rules were for all sorts of things. It's against this broad background, I like to call it the canonicity of practice, that the danger of dream pollution must be understood. Some dreams had the potential to wreck the self-control, so carefully cultivated during daylight hours, befoul one's carefully maintained purity, and thus block one's progress. Buddhist monks and nuns, for example, were served by purifiers to mediate their interactions with laypersons. They were instructed to carefully separate pure from soiled implements and articles of clothing. They lived inside a nested series of purified precincts that had been carefully demarcated through a ritual for fixing the boundary, the jie, sorry. All that, but they had no such buffers when it came to their dreams. The Protestant model of religion has conditioned us to take individuals' experiences as the primary data for the study of religion. Doubly so, I think, in the case of dreaming, the private experience par excellence. On this model, it's hard to see what was so dangerous about foul dreams. To do so, I think we must set aside the Protestant model and pan out from the dreamer as an individual. It wasn't just the dreamer who was put at risk by polluting dreams. For practitioners always operated in communities, visible and invisible. They practiced in carefully curated circles of teachers, masters, fellow disciples, the often mentioned wholesome friends, shanyo, older, younger siblings under the same teacher, shixiongdi, fellow practitioners, tongxue, and so on. Many had joined extended families, distinct from their natal ones. They labored under rules and rhythms established by divine beings and revered founders, within the bounds of a hard-won order that was not of their own making. They saw themselves as positioned in lineages stretching back in time and forward in time and in cosmic time, generational and cosmic time, situated in networks extending out in terrestrial and cosmic space. Their knowing was a connecting with shared subject matters, texts, and practices. It was this common activity of learning, remembering, self-reflection, acting, thinking, and speaking that was their self-cultivational labor. Even when working in apparent solitude, they were never alone, always overseen by a normally invisible cloud of beings and by their lineage forebears. All this was endangered by dreams that exposed them to beings or forces outside the boundaries, outside the canon, and thus pulled them out of the community of practice into a merely private world, making them a peril to others within the circle, making them an other. The measures taken to restore purity knit the practitioner back into the circle. I find instructive Peter Brown's way of capturing just what was so problematic about sexual dreams and nocturnal emissions in medieval European monasteries. Brown writes, the continuance of sexual dreams and emissions served to warn the monk of the presence within his heart of a more faceless, lingering desire, the wish to possess experiences of his own. The sexuality of the emission created a disjunction between his public daylight self and a last oasis of incommunicable privatized experience. When such dreams ceased, the last fissure between the private person and his fellows could be assumed to have closed. I think that the most fearsome thing about polluting dreams wasn't their emotional valence. It was that by virtue of practitioners having been touched by beings, forces, or situations from beyond the canon, such dreams threatened to tug dreamers loose from the connective web of community and tradition throw them off their self-cultivational path, whatever it was, and cast them out into idiosyncrasy. And that was the nightmare. Thanks.